I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the new Mercedes-AMG GLA 45S. An important release for Mercedes-AMG in Australia. This is the second gen GLA 45, and the first one did really well. In fact, all of the original AMG 45 series cars did super well here in Australia as kind of like an AMG starter pack. Well, now AMG have the 35 cars, and recently you and I drove the GLA 35, which sits underneath the 45S in the lineup. This is quite a different beast. The 45S has a genuine AMG hand-built engine. It's still a 2-litre turbo like the 35, but it's much more powerful. 310 kilowatts of power, 500 Newton meters of torque, and that's out of a 2-litre engine. The 45 series cars also have a fully variable all-wheel drive system that can send 100% of available torque to the rear wheel. So these things can power oversteer if you want them to. Of course, there's also the A45S hot hatch and the CLA 45S sedan, but the GLA 45 has a package that a lot of Australians are after. And that's the crossover sort of aesthetic, even though the ground clearance of this vehicle is clearly really not much more than the A45 that sits underneath it. Speaking of the A45, that car is a little bit more affordable than the GLA 45, but they're all within a few $1,000s of one another. However, stepping up to the 45 is a big 25 grand increase over the GLA 35. So what do you get for your money? Power steps up from 225 kilowatts to 310 kilowatts. You get the trick all-wheel drive system, as I've already mentioned, and you get a much more focused vehicle in every way. Now, some of that is evident from here in the interior. We're sitting in a nicely specified 45 here with these racing bucket seats. They are firm, supportive, they're pretty comfortable, and they also look the part. Now, of course, AMG don't skimp on the necessity when you have a 3-pointed star on the steering wheel. They're still covered in very fine leather upholstery with yellow accents for this car. That's a little extroverted for my taste, but you know what? I don't actually mind it. Now, those yellow accents are repeated here on the steering wheel, which is finished in Alcantara. We have a yellow band at the 0-degree mark. We also have yellow contrast stitching. This looks and feels good, although friends don't let friends buy Alcantara steering wheels because of just how disgusting they get from the oils in your hands, so I would prefer a leather unit. There's also yellow in the adjustable ambient lighting in the interior, which looks pretty cool at night. The rest of the package in the GLA 45 is very similar to the other GLA models. All GLAs in Australia get these dual 10.25-inch screens that look pretty damn impressive when you sit in this car. Now at night, it's a lot. With all of the ambient lighting throughout the air vents and everywhere around the cabin, this is not a subtle or conservative interior. It's quite flashy, it's not really like Mercedes-Benz cars of old, and you either like that or you don't. The technology is quite intuitive. It looks very upmarket and mature. The maps in particular have really pleasant graphics. You do get CarPlay and Android Auto in the GLA, but it's wired only. Plus, all the ports in this car are the new USB-C style, so you'll either need new cables or converters if you don't have them already in your arsenal. The rest of the controls are pretty conveniently laid out. There's hard stuff for what you'd want: fan control, temperature, volume, drive modes. Not too much is relegated to screens. And then on the steering wheel, we've got really cool AMG specific stuff like a Manatino switch for your drive mode, and also adjustable shortcut keys for things like the performance exhaust, turning off the stability control, even stuff like turning off start stop, which is something a lot of people will want to do if they buy this car, I suppose. Now, the seats are really adjustable. We have controls up here on the door. Seat heating is included, even though these are kind of racing focused seats, and that's a nice to have. Practicality is also not bad. Big cup holders, wireless charging, a bin between the seats, which is actually quite deep with more USB ports, and door bins that can take big water bottles. And pleasingly, everything feels screwed together extremely well in this car. There's really not any flex in any of the components, which is more than we can say for entry-level Mercedes-Benz products even 5 years ago. Quality seems to be on the up. Let's have a look at the back seat. This is where the GLA 45 is a little bit more practical than the A45. The hip height is higher, so this car is going to be easier to get babies into, or old people, really people at either of the extremes of life. And then once you're back here, you'll see there is ample room for adults. The GLA 45 is a genuine 4-adult seater car, and you could even get someone in the middle if you had to, because it's quite high. For the new GLA, Mercedes made the car taller because buyers wanted it to look more like an SUV. Now, I don't think it looks particularly SUV-ish, it's quite round and organic, but it is more of a square box, and that means you get more space. So for myself at 6 foot, headroom is more than adequate, even though we've got a dual pane sunroof. Legroom's good, toe room's good. There is a hump in the floor in the middle, but it's forgivable and you could use it every now and then. Plus we've got air vents, some storage, another USB-C port. No armrest though in the back, which is quite a letdown on a 6-figure car, but the materials all continue back here in a plush form, which is quite pleasant. Of course, you are looking at the back of these buckets, which are not especially attractive and they don't have storage from the back. So in this car, I feel like you want to be sitting in the front. Heading around the back of the GLA 45, and it's a pleasant mix of, you know, reasonable conservatism, but also some extroversion for the 45 series as you would expect. Now we have this huge wing on the back. You don't have to have that, but I think it kind of suits, looks kind of cool. We've got quad exhaust pipes, which are standard on the GLA 45S. I think they look mean. And then a few classy touches like this chrome finisher for the boot. The tailgate's electric, and that opens up to reveal a really generous amount of space. Even though this car does have a proper four-wheel drive system and independent rear suspension, there is a good amount of cargo room. The boot's really square, got stuff like a protective cover here. Then underneath that, you'll find a tire inflation kit, because the GLA 45 does not have a spare wheel. With 20-inch wheels, you can kind of see why in such a small package, but still, if you're going to be taking your car further afield, it's something that you're going to want to keep in mind. However, we do get a nice quality cargo cover. We have hooks for your cargo as well, and a 12-volt socket, plus the ability to lower the tailgate or lock the car from right here around back. But we're going to jump in the driver's seat and see what the new GLA 45S is like on the road. All right, so let's take the new GLA 45 out for a bit of a shakedown. So one of the beautiful things about the old GLA 45 was it was actually quite different to the A45. It was a little softer, it rolled a bit more in the corners, but you could actually play with its chassis more than you could with the A45, which was really stiff, really flat. And the good news is that the new GLA 45 has retained some of that. It still actually is quite a playful chassis. It communicates with you loudly as a driver what's going on underneath this car. There's actually quite a lot of feel to it, which is great. But it is firmer and it is more focused, and there's less roll than in the previous GLA 45. Thankfully, the MFA2 platform that sits underneath this car is pretty good, as long as it has independent rear suspension, which this does. And despite being firmer and more focused, it's actually still really compliant. So driving the GLA 45 is actually a real joy. It's easy to look at a sports car like this or a sports SUV and kind of laugh because, you know, I mean, who's this car targeted to? But then when you get it out on the road, it all comes together. It all starts to make a lot of sense. And if you were after a small but practical AMG vehicle, the GLA 45 is really, really well engineered. And if the form factor and the shape appeals to you, then the driving dynamics follow. You know, this is a legit AMG with AMG-esque dynamics, and you can probably hear the soundtrack. Brilliant engine, handmade, 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol. Yeah, it's not a V8, but you know, V8s wouldn't fit into these vehicles anyway. But what it is hugely powerful. 310 kilowatts of power, 500 Newton meters of torque. There is a base model in some markets which has 280 kilowatts, but Mercedes-Benz Australia skips that in our market. We only get the S version, which is full fat. Now there's an 8-speed DCT, dual clutch auto, and that actually can apportion torque to the all-wheel drive system in a split second. It's quick, and you can hear the shifts are very, very snappy too. Now the engine is not only quick, but it's also characterful, both in how it revs. It's simultaneously boosty, but also linear. So there's just this half second from rest when you take off where it kind of gathers steam and then it just pulls hard. It's really flexible, really tractable. You know, it's quick in every situation. But the gearbox is actually refined enough. It doesn't like throw you back into the seat with every shift in an uncomfortable way like Hyundai engineering into their new DCT. Instead, it's a fast gearbox, but still comfortable, so I think it's really well done. And then the all-wheel drive system can do whatever it needs to do in the situation. 100% of torque can go rearward, so when you're firing out of a corner, it's sending a lot of torque to the back wheels, and as a default demeanor, it's rear bias, this system, unlike the GLA 35 or the GLA 250 with their you know, sort of reactive all-wheel drive systems that are front drive until you need a bit of rear drive. And, you know, a rear drive basis is how the GLA 45 conducts itself. You have lots of ability to correct your line on the throttle mid-corner. The steering's pretty uncorrupted, there's no torque steer. Speaking of the steering, it's classic AMG. It's not too heavy. It turns in quick, but there is a meatiness to the operation of the rack. You can move it easily, but there is a sense of some heft behind it, and of course delivered through this Alcantara wheel, the whole thing is quite a sensory experience, even if Alcantara wheels are not my personal cup of tea. But it's probably the GLA 45 suspension that sets it apart from a lot of hot hatches, in that it just has more give. The A45 is easily compliant enough to daily, but the GLA 45 takes it even further, which is a little bit more wheel travel and seriously impressive bump absorption. It's firm, no doubt. It communicates what's going on in the road. If you see an expansion joint, your butt's gonna feel an expansion joint, but it doesn't cause a judder or a big crash through the cabin. Only if you allow one of these big 20-inch boots to fall into a pothole will you find that upper limit of the suspension, and it can bottom out a little bit uncomfortably. But if you choose your line carefully and accurately, which is possible thanks to the good steering, then you shouldn't need to feel that. As you can hear, the exhaust makes some good noises. It's got two modes, a more social mode for crawling around your neighborhood at 6 in the morning and not waking everyone's children up, and then a powerful setting for what I'm doing now. It sounds really good. You've got a bit of crackle and pop on lift, you've got these snaps on upshift, it just burbles away. It's quite tidy actually. There's just something to do in this car. It's really involving, moves around underneath you. Got stacks of grip from the Conti Sport Contact 6 tyres, but you can see it's raining. This is ideal GLA 45 weather, where you can totally tap into this quality chassis and the proper four-wheel drive system on this car and really get it moving and get it working for you. I really like it actually. This isn't my genre of car. You'd know that if you'd been a subscriber for a while, but the GLA 45 does the job really well. Of course, you get these benefits in the A45 hatch and the CLA 45 sedan too. But the crazy thing is, as a daily, I think the GLA 45 does it best. I mean, it was the story with the old generation too. I think it still is. I think it works really well. It's refined too when you want it to be. There's a bit of road noise. The tyres are serious, so you expect that. But it's not too bad. Vibration free, the engine's really smooth. And safety's good. We've got AEB. We don't have junction AEB. We have forward AEB, high speed and low speed. We've got adaptive cruise control. We've got lane keep assist with really good, strong tracing, centering. blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert. We've got a 360-degree camera. We don't have reversing AEB on this car, which is a shame. Rearward visibility is okay, but it's not the best, so that technology would have been appreciated. So that's a close look at the new Mercedes-AMG GLA 45S here on Australian roads. Now, to purists, the emergence of this genre is kind of confusing. It's a hot hatch, pumped up, with a bit of cladding, with a big engine and a proper all-wheel drive system. Not what we would have considered a pure sports car a few years ago, and it still isn't. But for me, I try not to overthink it. The new GLA 45 drives really well. It's got a cracking engine. That's important because we think it's AMG's future. It turns in beautifully, it handles really well, and it's got a great all-wheel drive system that helps you really engage as a driver. Now, I'd personally take the A45S hot hatch because it's the same package in a smaller and lighter body. But I can see why the more practical and slightly larger GLA makes sense to some people. I'm keen to know what you think though, so let me know down below in the comments whether you'd consider a car like this. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell if you haven't already. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars. I hope you enjoyed this Chasing Cars review. If you did and you haven't subscribed, you can do so here. You can also watch our latest video or a playlist of our SUV reviews. We'd love to have you on board. I do encourage you to subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. And as always, thanks for watching.